Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Royals Rundown podcast presented by Royals Review. I am Jacob Milham, joined tonight by the one and only Jeremy Greco. Jeremy, how are we feeling tonight?
I'm not feeling very baseball-y, but I guess I'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, if you load up any social media right now, you're not seeing a lot of Kansas City Royals, but you are seeing a lot of Kansas City Chiefs. Luckily for you, we have a great baseball mind to talk about Kansas City Royals with you, FanGraphs' own Dan Szymborski. Dan, how are we feeling today?
It's not negative 10 degrees anymore, so that's
Woo!
always a plus.
Yes, it is. My pipes froze this week, and I had to go under the house and patch up some holes after they unfroze. So that was a terrible way to spend a Thursday and a Friday. But alas, here I am. I'm not under the house anymore, so that is always good. Whenever you get done taking care of your house, you can always go read at royalsreview.com. Make sure you join the comment community by creating an account over there and just make your voice heard from other Royals fans over at royalsreview.com. So, Jeremy, do you mind telling our listeners why we have Mr. Dan on the podcast again today?
So, like you said, Dan Szymborski writes for the FanGraphs, and he does the ZiPS projections, which are somebody came up with this crazy good projection system, and Dan's always writing about it for some reason. So we thought we'd get him on here to tell us what we can figure out from all this.
Yes, Dan. Who is this mysterious man behind the ZiPS projection system? You'll have to educate me.
Well, the guy who does the ZiPS projections, he's, as I always tell people, he's imprisoned in an oubliette underneath my shed, and I put his stuff to work if he wants to eat. If he wants food and water, I mean, that's what he's got to do.
All I imagine is you just printing out every single player page from like Baseball Reference and tossing it in a hole, saying, "Give me projections." Is that about how it works?
It was harder in the early years because he still had hope to escape, but now he's beaten down significantly. So he just gives me the projections, and I give him his high nutrition gruel.
I love it. Well, hey, all jokes aside, Dan built this projection system. It is I think it's kind of the basis for a lot of other projection systems that we've been seeing come out. So I thought that was very cool. It doesn't really have the same ring as Oopsie, though, Dan. I will say.
Well, you see, the thing is, I spent like a year working on it. I didn't actually know it'd be useful, and I couldn't really think of a name, so they just came together that way. It was, at the time, it was the only projection system to incorporate some of Roche McCracken's ideas about the interactivity between pitcher defense and ERA and that kind of thing. And so I wanted it to rhyme with dips. So I first thought sips, and sips sounds like a restaurant that's just like a hipster restaurant. It just has juice boxes. Like, let's go to sips. They got some of that, Slimer High C, the Ecto Cooler.
Some of that high protein gruel that you're talking about?
Well, no, there was no protein in High C or those drink boxes. We'd have, all High C, no Capri Sun. I hate Capri Sun more than anything because when I was a kid, every time I ever had a Capri Sun, the straw went through the back of the bag, and then I have 2 holes in the Capri Sun bag, and they only gave you 6 ounces compared to the juice box, which was 8 ounces. These are the things I remember. I used to trade away Capri Suns.
I got the Kool-Aid version of the Capri Suns they came out with. I don't know, fairly recently, and I realized that I took one sip and it was empty. So I just started cutting them open and drinking like 3 or 4 at a time.
Yeah, you see, super big gulp. That's a drink because it's super and it's big, and you get like a week's worth of sugar. So that's nice. So anyway, since sips didn't work, I used a Z, which is the second letter of my last name, and I tried to capitalize it like California Highway Patrol, but I kind of screwed it up the first time and I made the S capitalized. But Jay Jaffe, in his blog at the time, was he Fidelity Infield or was that Rich Letterer? What was his?
I think that was Rich.
Oh, God.
I can't remember now.
Oh, well, I can't ask Jay right now. I guess I could call him. That'd be a very weird call. Hold on. Well, I call Jay and ask him about his blog name in 2002. Oh, this is going to affect me. And he had already caught it up and linked it. So I said, oh, whatever with it. That's how it's spelled. And it turned out to be useful. And it turned out to make me employable in baseball, which was kind of weird. And so it's been more than 20 years now as time tell. And I'm a lot older and grumpier. Well, not actually grumpier. I was a pretty grumpy young person.
Not much changes over the years, but ZiPS projections do and Dan's for the 2025 Royals came out. Are you about halfway through the teams right now? Is my math correct?
Well, I only
Almost
have 2
done.
more teams to go.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
man. Shoo.
The other St. Louis is tomorrow,
Okay.
and then San Diego, well, Monday or whatever day this is. I guess you could do like a very weird voiceover with a robot voice. And the Padres later
day.
this week.
I like it. So where you can find those projections is over at
At
FanGraphs.
FanGraphs.com.
Yep. Dan has a really nice long write up and just breaks down each and every one. And then, as spring training approaches, you could just go over to the projections tab on FanGraphs and see them there. So it's a pretty awesome tool. But before we get too deep into it, Dan, I do have to ask. So you put out a nice little graphic with each one of these projections. And if you go over to right field behind Hunter Renfroe, there is this amalgamation, I can only assume, a Frankenstein, if you will, of baseball players out there. How do you say that player's name?
Oh, that player is Drew Y. Sonrun Blatt-Marquesco. He's from like 4 different places.
This truly a miracle of science, if you will. Does this just show like how, I guess, even like the outfield depth is in Kansas City? Is that why you did that?
It's just because from a practical standpoint, I put everyone projected on our depth charts with 50 plate appearances at a position on the depth chart. But right now there are 5 guys on the depth chart with 50 plate appearances. It's like Hunter Renfroe and a bunch of guys between 50 and 100. And then I kind of run out of room.
Sure.
So I just kind of smush people together. And I've done that for several years. I mean, I could probably just make them smaller or something, but it's more fun to really get, because there's always someone who gets really mad about it. Like there's no player by this name on the team.
It's a joke.
And so I don't even explain it at this point. I just let them go. You have to figure it out. It's no fun if I tell them the joke answer.
Very true.
The solution. Do jokes have answers or solutions?
I think
weird
they
to
have
the
answers.
answer. Like, you got the wrong answer. Like, this, what? I don't know.
Or do they have responses? I don't know.
So they have punchlines, but they don't have
Off-season baseball, everyone. It's amazing. It's truly a mind bender, I will say. Dan,
Hey,
listen.
just be glad I haven't taken us down like a whole trails type
Not
where-
yet. That's for later
I-
in the podcast.
because I put a lot of peer pressure on Hokius to get through the games.
It's true.
I was
Good work.
on his butt like, yeah, you got to play Reverie. Got to finish it off, get some closure, dude.
I love it.
I don't know. And Dan kept coming.
There you go. And here we are. Gotta catch up. Gotta catch up there,
Well,
Jeremy.
my copy of my next game is in another state for me right now, so it's gonna have to wait a bit.
Oh, darn. Darn. Well, so Dan, I remember looking at last year's projections, and it was particularly ugly. I think it was one of the first times you said that you had a negative projected WAR for an entire bullpen. And the Royals bullpen wasn't great last year, but it wasn't as bad as that projection came out to be. But now we have the outfield looking especially ugly right now. Only 1.3 between the left and the right primary outfielders. Is this one of the worst outfield tandems in your projection system this year?
It's pretty bad, but it's above 0. There's no negative sign by the Royals. And outside of the corners, which I still don't understand how little has been done there.
Yeah.
It's
You
not
and us
like,
both.
yeah, I not even, they haven't even done like a half-ass thing, not even a quarter-ass thing. They're like eighth-assing it. That's not even a thing.
Nope. I don't want to know what that imagery looks like, Dan. That is pretty scary.
I guess it's a quarter of one buttock.
I don't know why we're slicing it like pie, but that's all I see in my head now. Anywho's,
Is it cake?
there we go. I like that. So if you look at the ZiPS projections, there's a lot of numbers, a lot of names, a lot of guys that we will and won't see at the major league level this year. But I asked Jeremy before we started recording about, hey, I wonder why Dan includes the old Royals players in there. Like you have Adam Frazier and Tommy Pham and those sort of guys in there. Is there a reason why you include them with the Royals?
Well, my policy for 20 years is I include everyone with their most recent team because it doesn't hurt to see the projection. It's not like someone's gonna go, I see Tommy Pham, it's upsetting me.
Oh, you'd be
I don't
surprised.
know.
You'd be
I
very
mean,
surprised, Dan.
I include players for a year after they go overseas or retirement. So the Blue Jays got a Joey Votto projection, even though he didn't actually play on the major league team and has officially retired.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to list everyone with their most recent team just because I kind of factor these into 30 posts, and that way I don't have to do a weird free agent post with 170 major leaguers and like another couple hundred minor leaguers.
Yeah.
It's just information. I mean, these aren't the seasonal projections, which are going to be completely different and not going to contain anyone who's not on the roster.
Right. No, that totally makes sense, and that's along the lines of what Jeremy said before we started recording. I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, every year I had that in the I had this disclaimer at the bottom that nobody ever gets to and reads. Because I've done this spiel every year, like, so yes, if you see Joe Schmo who quit baseball back in August, he's listed here intentionally. And every year I put a different absurd musical genre and nobody ever notices it.
A Norwegian ukulele Dixieland jazz band that only covers songs by the Smiths.
Yeah, so
that is very
if Joe
specific.
Schmo quits baseball back in August to form that band, he's still listed here intentionally.
Outstanding. Yep. See, and I am the target audience of that because I obviously did not reach that disclosure.
No one ever does. But see, here's the difference. You're not the standard person because you didn't get mad at me after not reading it. Most people get mad at me, like, he retired. Like, oh, did he? I had no idea that Albert Pujols retired.
Yes.
That's such news to me.
But yeah, this is so much good information just to set up for the 2025 season and what we're looking at. It is like, I don't even know where to start. Jeremy, like, where do you want to start with this, man?
I'm gonna start us out in left field, honestly. MJ Melendez. Because he has been kind of a hot point of contention here in Kansas City. Obviously, he's got a very low projection here of 0.6 WAR. I assume this is FWAR. Is that correct, Dan?
It's FWAR-ish because it's technically ZiPS WAR, which does a few things differently than FanGraphs WAR. One, I give first base the DH the first base penalty, not the DH penalty.
Okay.
And that's actually a change that's likely to be in FWAR at some point. We were actually long in discussions about that. And the other thing is ZiPS doesn't go purely by FIP. ZiPS gives credit to pitchers who have a history of overperforming their team defense, so to speak. So someone that has exceeded for a number of years, I think Marco Gonzalez of the Mariners is a good example, will get a few more runs in ZiPS WAR because ZiPS will attempt to give them some credit for that.
Okay.
It tries to adjust FIP to defense in a way, if that makes sense.
Okay. Makes sense. So 0.6, not great, obviously.
No.
But then I was scrolling down and looking at the 80-20 percentiles, and I noticed that Melendez does have a very good 80th percentile. And just to confirm for myself that not everybody has a great 80th percentile, I did go look at Isbell and Michael Garcia, who are a couple guys who have struggled with the bat, and their 80th percentiles were not quite so good. Obviously, 80th percentile is unlikely to happen, but is it reasonable for me to take from that MJ Melendez has a better chance than, say, those other two guys of actually turning in a positive offensive season for the Royals next year?
I think it's a fair thing to say. He does have, some real power upside, and it's not that crazy simply because on a fundamental level, 1 in 5 is not that unlikely.
Okay.
If you think about, 9 starters per team, 270 guys, you expect, more than 50 of them to have hit their 80th percentile projection. Some of that, of course, is defense. The defense is not good, let's just say.
Yeah.
So it's mostly driven by the offense, but there is a chance that he could be a plus offensive player. The problem, of course, is it's still saddled to defense because he's kind of got that what I think Baseball Prospectus has once coined it prospects disease, in which he doesn't field well enough to play catcher, but he might not hit well enough to play corner outfield.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So he gets that WRC plus all the way up to 131, which is very good, but it still only ends up at a 1.4 WAR, which is mediocre at best. And that would be that defense that you were talking about. What's going on? If you could tell me maybe with Maikel Garcia, because he's a guy that I thought was more likely to break out, but you think like his best offensive season, or his 80th percentile offensive season, I should say, is a 105. And I should clarify, ZiPS thinks that, not necessarily you, I guess, though I assume you think a lot of what ZiPS thinks.
I think one of the problems is that guys who don't have a lot of power don't tend to have a ton of upside if it's unlikely that they'll develop power, because a 20 home run hitter will become a 40 home run hitter a lot more than a 10 home run hitter will become a 30 home run hitter, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
ZiPS doesn't see Garcia as having much power upside, and it doesn't really think that, like, if he even goes crazy with stolen bases or something, that he'll do that much, because it's already projecting like 30 stolen bases, like 4 or 5 caught stealing, 4 it looks like. So it sees limited upside there. And obviously there's going to be some batting average upside for any player, but that mostly involves luck rather than like a real growth, especially for a player who's, he's not he doesn't take a lot of strikeouts, but he's not like an elite contact guy. He's not going to go Luis Ariz or anything. So I think there's just more uncertainty with Melendez than there is with Garcia. Garcia feels more like the guy he is than Melendez might be.
But on the plus side, again, tying that defense in, the 80th percentile for Garcia would have him at 3.4 FWAR. So, or ZiPS WAR. I'm going to get these words correct.
Z-More?
Yeah. So he would be an above average valuable player if he could even hit league average, basically, based on his defense.
Yeah, but I mean, think of it this way. There's a 36% chance that either Garcia or Melendez will hit their 80th percentile.
Okay. See, that's a good way to think about it. And I know listeners out there, we're throwing a lot of numbers. It might be hard to keep track. This article that we're all referencing is going to be down in the podcast description below. Also, Max had a good little summary of it on royalsreview.com, so go check that out. I know that one person that we haven't talked about that a lot of folks are going to be interested in is Bobby Witt Jr. He had an otherworldly season last year, and I mean, frankly, ZiPS has still a pretty respectable projection for him, right, Dan?
Yeah, ZiPS isn't projecting another 10-win season because those aren't really the baseline median projections. If you're telling me you're a 10-win, if someone says, okay, Dan, he needs to be projected as a 10-win player, then I would say to you, okay, so you think he's more likely to have a 12-win season than a 6-win season? Because that's kind of what someone has to say. There are a lot of things can go wrong, whether you call it the Madden curse or the Wheaties box curse or regression toward the mean. But any player having a star season has a very skewed risk profile. There's a lot more to go down than go up. There are a lot more scenarios where Witt is worse than in 2025 or 2024 than he is actually better. And that goes for any star. It's not picking out Witt, indiscriminately. It's just that if you project guys having 7, 8, 9 win seasons to repeat, you'll actually do a really bad job projecting. ZiPS only projects one player above 7 wins. That's Aaron Judge, 7.3. And in the whole league, for position players, there are only 11 players that ZiPS projects with 5 WAR.
Gotcha.
So it's projecting Bobby Witt will be elite, but it's just recognizing that there's a lot of uncertainty. If you want a good example of that, Ronald Acuna Jr. was the leading WAR projection last year, and things can happen very easily. Things that happen to reduce his WAR from 8 to 1, then they're going to increase it. And things can happen to Ohtani, things can happen to Soto. Judge has an injury history. There are a lot of things that can happen. And for a player who's only had one season at MVP level, Witt got a pretty solid projection along with Gunnar Henderson, who's in a kind of a similar boat.
Who got the better projection? I haven't looked at the Orioles.
It depends on the your exact dynamics. ZiPS actually gives Henderson a slight edge in their respective parks, but if you project them in a neutral park, Witt projects 1 run better than Henderson.
Oh my goodness.
Man, pretty neck and neck there.
Close there, yeah.
And he also has the higher projection over the next 5 years. He's behind
Okay.
only Soto in the 5-year projection.
Wow. That's very impressive and a good spot to be. Well, I mean, Witt's still a couple of years removed from his prime, or excuse me, ahead of his prime.
Sorry, I should say as a hitter, Ohtani, when you combine offense and defense, still projects better than Witt. I didn't want to get into the
Gotcha.
idea that Ohtani's. Yeah.
We're just so used to Ohtani being a DH only. We haven't seen him from the mound or in the field in a while. It is pretty favorable though when you have two Hall of Fame talents compared to Bobby Witt Jr., Francisco Lindor, and Alex Rodriguez. So that is very good. But I mean, it felt like is it Dickie Tone or is it Dickie Thone? How do you say that, Dan?
Well, I think at this stage, since he's kind of forgotten that, I'm trying to remember the last time I heard his name. I grew up watching. Oh, God damn it! I always thought it was Tone, but maybe I've been
think it's
pronouncing.
Tone.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Oh, I need to like do an article on him and like call him and interview him and see if I can get him to say his name. But no, he was a really, really good player. He got hit by that Mike Torres, I think, fastball. Was it Mike
Oh,
Torres that hit
really?
him? Yeah. Oh God. Yeah, I think it was Mike Torres plunked him in a game in '84, I think.
That's what it looks like. Yeah. I just
And he
pulled up
never was
his
quite the
baseball
same
reference.
after that. He had a little bit of a late career revival with the Phillies, which he just missed making their World Series team.
Oh man, I see that.
But no, he had a terrific. People forget how good he was as a young player.
Yeah, I see that 83 and 82 seasons with the Houston Astros were pretty impressive. Just
I
a
mean,
12.3 FWAR over those 2 seasons alone.
he was a 2020 guy in '83 when that was actually a hard thing to do. A shortstop that had a 2020 season. I believe he actually even led in Baseball Reference War, the league that year.
He did.
And he got some MVP votes, I believe. I'm
Yep.
kind of
Seventh
remembering here.
MVP voting.
Yeah, people forget him because of the plunking, but he was terrific.
Hey, learn something new every single day. Hey, speaking of some of these comparisons, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how, for the casual reader, how much should they invest in these comparisons? Because there are some very eye-popping comparisons, especially when you get down to prospects, Dan.
Well, I would say not at all. They're mostly just for interest
Okay.
because with Zips wants to project a player. Zips will compare him to a humongous cohort of similar players. So Bobby Witt is compared to a ton of young second base, shortstop, third base stars with power, with speed. There's even a couple corner outfielders in there because there's only so many shortstops like Bobby Witt Jr. So it's not the exact identity of number 1 and number 2 and number 3 is not that important. It just kind of it's interesting, I guess, is the best way to say it. It's not really a huge part of a projection. Like if you cut out Francisco Lindor and Alex Rodriguez from the comps list, it really wouldn't change the projection more than like a hit or two one way or the other. It isn't really that big a factor, but it does tell you about the players, and sometimes players and they'll learn something about a player from the past. And I always have someone who noted someone and is surprised and reads up about the player.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about Dickie Tone, but I was like the eye popping ones that really stood out to me, like Ben Kudrna, one of the top pitching prospects in the Royal system, gets a Kurt Schilling nod in the pitcher comp. Or let's see here, it was Eric Sarantola, a new 40-man addition to the Royals organization, got a comp to Ryan Helsley, the St. Louis Cardinals closer. So it's just you don't want folks get too excited just seeing those names associated with Royals players,
As long as they don't end up trading the next Kurt Schilling.
It was, I think the way that Jeremy put it before we started recording was, as long as he is just Kurt Schilling from the mound, we're
the
good.
Kurt Schilling.
Yes.
I don't do person comps. That'd be really weird.
that would be
the unexplored territory is the personality comps, so you can figure out how the teams will mesh together the best.
Oh my gosh, that's the next frontier of baseball, Jeremy. Putting a value to personality. Oh my goodness.
No problems with that. There are absolutely no downfalls or downsides to that at all.
None. Not a single one. But overall, Dan, how are you feeling about this Royals team?
I think I'm about where Zips is. Zips sees them as a mid-80s-ish team that has some problems and that could have done something about the corner outfield and chose not to, but they have Witt, which takes you a long way. There are 5 other positions that have 2-win projections,
Yeah.
and the starting pitching looks good. The Zips has the starting pitching as one of the better ones in baseball, not at the elite tier, but it's a good rotation and it's a solid bullpen. It's not the Twins or the Guardians bullpen, which Zips thinks are 2 of the 3 top ones in baseball, but it's an above average. It's a solid B plus pen, which is, as you noted, quite different than last year's projection.
Yeah.
It really helps a lot to have Hunter Harvey up there. It's just
Lucas Erceg.
Lucas Erceg, the Schreiber.
Yeah.
There are things to like about the Royals, and I think there's actually I don't want to say it's a final projection, but I believe that when the final numbers are run, based on what I've already filed, that the Royals are going to be projected for more wins than the Cardinals are.
Okay. All right.
That's certainly good news for many Kansas City fans.
Yes, that it is.
And I'm not someone who tends to, puff up the Royals too much.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's not really a known quality of any baseball writer out there, is to fluff up the Royals, Dan.
I mean, Nair didn't. I mean, Randy doesn't. I mean,
fair enough. It is. Listen, I'm gonna grab the wheel and I'm gonna jerk it real quick, because you've brought up the corner outfield a couple of times this podcast, and we saw the final deal for Anthony Santander going to the Toronto Blue Jays. I don't want to talk about the deferred money. I don't want to talk about the fit up there in Toronto. It is very astounding that the Royals haven't done anything to add to that corner outfield platoon. What do you think that they could do at this point, Dan?
The options are no longer very exciting. I thought they should have gone after Santander, all for the same deal, but not deferred. But they're not going to do that, it looks like, since he's already signed, and so that isn't how it works. But what surprises me is they haven't done anything bad either. Like, they didn't give like a silly contract to Grichuk or something.
No, that's true.
Or another 2 years to Hunter Renfroe.
Yeah, I mean, they could have done like actual bad things that they think are good, but they didn't do that either. It just kind of went.
Just kind of shrugged the shoulders, looked
Whatever.
at the surprise.
We made the playoffs with him. Meh, it's Christmas. Let's go home.
Well, I think it is fun to look at your projections as well, because there are some outfielders here that you project solid seasons from here in Zips. Guys like Drew Waters, Carter Jensen, even Dairon Blanco, John Rave, Tyler Gentry, all projected to have solid seasons if they spend, 500 plate appearances at the major league level. Do you think that they could help in 2025? Or?
I think they could help. I think the problem is that the Royals have a lot of guys who are most valuable because they can play center field and not so much the corner. They have a pretty good spare center field roster, should we say. I was kind of hoping Rivertown would get a better projection because I love saying his name.
Oh, yeah,
because
for sure.
When I was a kid, there was like a local Chuck E. Cheese place around here in Baltimore called Rivertown with like its own animatronic, like Southern band of animals playing. That was one of my favorite places to go as a little kid. I had birthday parties there at Rivertown. I was like, Rivertown!
That is, I've never even heard of it.
Well, it was a local
gotcha.
thing. And I found out like 40 years after that, like the animatronic animals that were actually sold at auction and they're like still being used like in a bar in Scotland.
What? The wackiest thing.
Crazy, wonderful place.
What? Wasn't there a Disney World attraction that was like that had the animatronic bears? Was it the Country Bears?
Yeah, the Country Bears.
Yeah, that's what it was.
I thought you were like a Disney attraction that auctioned off their animatronic.
Oh.
Like, Disney would never. What are you talking about?
No, those are in a dark room somewhere. Dark, dusty room somewhere.
Disassembled into their component parts and melted down so that no one can steal their proprietary secrets.
Of course, you don't want another Five Nights at Freddy's on your hands with Disney at the center of it. Anywho's, Jeremy,
is there anywhere to put a link in here?
Yeah, we have show notes.
I just have hold on. Didn't work. Okay, sorry. I actually found a photo of the animatronic Captain Andy.
Send a link to it to Jeremy. We'll drop it in the show notes. I want to see this too.
Yeah, I need to find where it was in Scotland though. So we'll keep going. I mean, I
Okay.
don't think anyone wants to talk about Dan's childhood kids restaurant in Baltimore, Maryland in 1983.
So
Oh man.
I got a wild hair and I went to go look at Jack Caglione's projections, and they're not great. A lot of people, the Royals and close media to them, are kind of talking about he could be a real fast riser.
He still could be.
Okay.
I don't think you want to. I mean, there's not everyone's projection except for like Paul Skeens coming out of college kind of stinks. It's just because there's a lot of uncertainty about college players.
Right. Okay.
Wasn't Caglianone one of the fiends in Final Fantasy IV? No, that was Cagnazzo.
Yeah, Cagnazzo. That was his name.
I was thinking it was Caglianone. Like, wait, no, that's not right. The Fiend of War.
It was something that started Cag and sounded Italian. So
yeah,
you got that part
Caglianone.
right.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the projections for I'm just thinking about the Royals news from this week, and the having 3 top 100 prospects in the system according to MLB Pipeline. Jack Caglione had a negative projection. Blake Mitchell does as well, and then I think Carter Jensen was like one of the top projected guys if he came to the major league level right now. Is that really because he could draw a walk and get on base? Is that do you think that's where his value comes from?
Well, Ward tends to like catchers, but he's not hopeless offensively. He's not hopeless defensively, and that's usually pretty decent for a catcher.
Yeah, true. That is when you have I think it was Yasmani Grandal having a 2-WAR season in the year 2024. That's when Ward does like catchers. Jeremy, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I'm just saying we're probably going to come a couple runs off the position adjustment for catcher, but nothing's in stone yet. That's just a sneak peek.
We're still learning. Jeremy, anything I forgot to ask about ZiPS here?
So one last thing I thought was kind of interesting is that you've got India here in second base and left field, and Massey only at second base. And I know Massey himself has talked about, potentially playing in left field, and the Royals have talked about one or both of them playing some third base. What goes into deciding, what positions they're going to be in the projections?
Well, in the projections themselves, I just use the most common recent position they've played, unless there's an pretty ironclad statement of them going somewhere else. When I do the depth charts, I just use the FanGraphs depth charts at this point of the year. I call them the FanGraphs X ZiPS depth charts. So whatever we have in the depth charts, I just go with at this point of the season.
Gotcha.
I have a lot to do, so you can get mad at Jason Martinez. But it'll be interesting how they use India, because he does have a solid projection, but he's listed in a number of places and not really. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I don't know how to make one of them a good corner outfielder, because that's such a necessary offensive. It's like you wish that the Royals could have traded for the Jonathan India of left field.
Right.
Yes, for sure.
That would have been much more useful.
It would have. I think it's crazy that his 80th percentile WAR is only second to Witt on the team, 3.6 there. So it is. But then you also go down to 20th percentile and you got 0.9. So there's a pretty wide gap between those two, as you would expect.
My favorite thing is that nobody on the offense has an 80th percentile WAR as high as Bobby Witt's 20th percentile WAR.
You're right.
Wow. I didn't notice that. Yikes.
Great.
So a normal bad year for Witt is a normal great year for anyone else.
That
happens when you're
sums
elite.
it up. I mean, that's a great way to look at it and to think about Bobby Witt Jr. is, I think a lot of people are kind of married to this idea that he's going to be a 10-WAR guy every year for the rest of his career, which obviously is just insane. But I think if Bobby did have a 3.9 WAR year, a lot of people would blame him if the team underperformed. And it's like, well, if anybody else were nearly as good as he was, they would be much better off.
I think my biggest worry when I talk about the corner outfield is if the Royals are going to fall into the Trout-Ohtani trap. Because the Angels kind of used Trout and Ohtani because they had them as kind of the reason to half-ass and not address problems elsewhere.
Hmm.
And the Royals made the playoffs on the back of their pitching staff and wit. I mean, they had like a 97 WRC plus with Bobby Witt basically having the best season in like team history. So you worry if they thought, I mean, I don't want to get into their heads because I don't know what's in their heads, but you worry that if they did think that they didn't need to do much with the corners because they have Witt, then that's a problem, because instead of using Witt's wins to become a better team and go for the division, you're using Witt's wins to cover for things you didn't do elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of Trout's and Otani's wins went to. That they frequently the Angels went into the seasons missing pitchers, mixing corner outfielders, just thinking, Pujols isn't a problem, even though we're paying him. So, but we got all these wins from Trout and Otani, and that's what happened. And that was kind of the downfall of the Angels, because they relied on those two guys, and you can't rely on two guys when you're a baseball team. That's not how a baseball team works.
Yeah.
There's no Jordan Pippen of baseball, and there can't be, because of the way baseball's designed.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, if that worked, then the New York Yankees would be having a World Series championship parade down Fifth Avenue. But alas, here we are. Dan, thank you so much for coming on and explaining the ZiPS projections for this year for all of our listeners out there. If you want to read through this entire thing, it'll be linked in the podcast description. It's on FanGraphs as well. And go check out all the other teams and their projections. Before we get on out of here, it is time for those Royals reviews. Dan, do you remember our reviews? Remember that?
we were supposed to review a random thing that we encountered.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever it is.
I'll do two things that I've encountered in the last couple weeks.
Okay.
One, I've been playing, and I finished last night, the remake of Romancing Saga 2. That was an old game that never was officially translated, and it got a kind of a refinish. It might have been actually translated for like PlayStation Store or something obscure, but they did a remake of it called Romancing Saga 2: Revenge of the Seven, and it is a terrific game. It's an old school JRPG. It's not really about character development. Like, the kingdom in the game is the character, because basically you're not playing as individual characters, and you play as different emperors, and they succeed each other, and hundreds of years pass between things, and you play as their successors. It is a fun game. It was a really enjoyable experience. I actually enjoyed it, I think, more than any Final Fantasy I've played since probably, well, not counting 14. That's MMO, and that's not really the same thing, since 12. The other thing I did is I finally tried the Samyang Foods Buldak Carbonara ramen.
Ooh,
which does not taste like carbonara at all, but it is absolutely amazing. I don't know what it tastes like. It tastes like creamy and spicy, and I don't know why, but it's really, really, really good. And
that's all that matters.
I mean, I liked their normal ramen before, but I always thought carbonara. I mean, it tastes nothing like carbonara. It's like if you asked someone to make carbonara, but they had never tasted it, and you didn't tell them what it consisted of. Sure, but it's really good. And
I'll have to try that.
Yeah, and like all Samyang ramen containers, the graphics on the bag are absolutely insane.
Yeah, those are known for their aesthetics, to say the least. Jeremy, what you got for a review this week?
Gosh, I had something and then my brain evaporated.
Well, here I got a quick one.
Go. I'll get it back while you're talking.
Random. I don't know about you guys, but I have like random baseball card boxes. Like, I haven't touched them. I haven't gone through them in so very long. I think the last time I bought like actual baseball cards was probably in 2021. But I had to clean out a closet, and a card fell out, and it's a Patrick Bailey 18U autograph, and it was just very odd. I was like, Patrick Bailey, that name sounds really familiar. Like, oh wait, he's the San Francisco Giants catcher that I think Baseball America said the Royals should have drafted in 2020 when they did their redraft this year. So I just thought it was cool, just reviewing, having random baseball card collections. Did I give you enough time, Jeremy?
The one thing the Royals don't have enough of in their system is catching prospects.
Oh yes, could always use more.
No, it didn't come back to me, so I'm just gonna make something up. I'm gonna say Oh gosh, I had it. I had 6 different things. I'm gonna give you a YouTube channel that I've been watching some of lately, called Nando V Movies. He writes about movies and does video essays about them, and I find them interesting. A lot of the stuff he does recently is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I love reading other people's thoughts about that or watching other people's thoughts about that. So you might guess I watch a lot of YouTube videos about movies since those are the channels I always end up recommending.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's another one I will recommend there.
Hey, it does feel like I'm plugging FanGraphs a lot on here, but one thing that I did want to talk about before we left here, if you follow the job posting blog roll over there at FanGraphs, Kansas City Royals do have a couple of openings for jobs. So if you're ever interested in working in baseball, the Royals are looking for a couple of folks. So go see if you fit the requirements and the qualifications and toss your hat in the ring. The worst thing they could say is nothing, which happens a lot in the hiring process, apparently. All right.
I'm probably gonna throw my name in for that dev job just because I'm sure that they'll look at it and go, "That guy?
Nah,
But I'll do
nah.
it.
All right, but that is going to do it for us today. Dan, again, thank you so much for joining us. What's a good social media platform, or what's a good way for folks to follow along with your work?
Well, you can still find me at D Szymborski on Twitter or X or whatever we call it. It's weird to call it X. It sounds like I'm sending people to my porn platform. Catch me on X. Or dzymborski.fangraphs.com on Blue Sky, the butterfly one.
There you go. All right. Sounds like a plan. All right. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find our links down in the podcast description below. But Jeremy and I have some Kansas City Chiefs football to go watch. So, from everyone here at the team, thank you so much for joining us today. And until next time, go Royals.